My name is Mandy Russo. I'm the Executive Director for the Whistler Institute. We're a registered charity, and we are funded through ticket sales. Thank you for being here. Through sponsors, donors, and grants. Our mission is to bring educational programming, thought-provoking dialogue, and meaningful discussion to our community. One of the ways we do this is through the Global Perspective Speaker Series, where we collaborate with leading experts to share their research and bold perspectives, broadening our understanding of the world in which we live. Tonight's event is the 5th in our speaker series this year, Democracy in Science, Anecdotes, Positive Notes, and a Forward-Thinking Approach. The title was inspired by a comment by Kennedy during our planning process. He noted that democracy and science are deeply interconnected, both relying on opposing viewpoints, rigorous debate, and respectful critique to advance. At the Whistler Institute, we believe that the best conversations happen when we approach them with curiosity, integrity, and a willingness to listen. We encourage all our event attendees to embrace our respectful dialogue agreement, which is a shared commitment to meaningful discussion. As you engage tonight, we invite you to also practice curiosity, integrity, and a willingness to listen when it comes to interacting with one another. For housekeeping notes, please make sure your phones are on silent. The restrooms are downstairs to the right. And our board chair, Sue Adams, will be closing out the session with a few words. And following that, at 7:45, we do have a reserved section at Hunter Gather, and we encourage everybody to join us to continue the conversation over food and drink. And for every item that's purchased, $1 will be donated back to the Whistler Institute. So thank you for joining us for that. And the event is being recorded. You'll notice Yorn Road is taking some photos. We also have it video recorded so that it can be streamed again on our website. And without further ado, I will introduce Mr. Jack Crompton to introduce our speaker.
It's so nice to see so many people here. Let's have a cheer for democracy. Ready? Hey! And now one for science as well. Yeah. It is so awesome to be here talking about what we do together as a community, as a province, as a country. And I think democracy is tremendously precious. And so an opportunity to have that conversation in this place is very exciting for me. Dr. Kennedy Stewart is an associate professor at SFU School of Public Policy. He is a former member of Parliament from 2011 to 2018. He's a former mayor of Vancouver between 2018 and 2022. Political science, Dr. Stewart's teaching and interests include democratic governance, public policy theory and practice, leadership, and cities. He taught at 6 different universities, including the London School of Economics, University College, and Birkbeck College at the University of London. While an MP, Dr. Stewart was official opposition critic for science and technology, led opposition to the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion, and brought electronic petitioning to the House of Commons, which I'm sure was useful during COVID. As mayor, he led an organization with a $1.7 billion operating budget through COVID-19 pandemic. He moved forward reconciliation efforts substantively. He secured over $1 billion in housing investment. He oversaw the adoption of the Broadway plan. He led the push to decriminalize drugs in British Columbia. I had the absolute pleasure and privilege of working with Dr. Stewart on the Indigenous-led bid for the 2030 Winter Olympic Games. We found a tremendous amount of alignment in a desire to be great followers of the Musqueam, the Squamish, the Tsleil-Waututh, and the Lil'wat, and to push hard to see their vision delivered. I remember the first time I ever talked to Dr. Stewart, he phoned me, And he said, I really would like to get behind this effort, and I would like to be a good follower. And those words drew that picture so clearly for me. I couldn't have seen it any better. And it really helped me understand my role in that process. I left that process with a tremendous amount of respect for the way Kennedy participated. Politics is a funny vocation. You put up your hand for the job, knowing that if you do make a difference, people will say all kinds of nasty things about you. It's part of the job, and it's part of something that you understand going into it. I will say, whether you agree with him or disagree with him, you will find Dr. Stewart thoughtful, compelling, and committed to making his community and our province better. I wrote this earlier, and I thought one other thing you will find him is unafraid. He is eager to participate in the public dialogue. So please welcome my friend, Dr. Kennedy Stewart.
Hi, everybody. Is this, hear me okay? Excellent. Well, thank you very much. First, too, I want to acknowledge we're on the unceded traditional territories of the Lilwat and Squamish. We're just reminiscing a bit about the 2030 Olympic bid, and although we didn't get all the way there because of the feds, it did mean a lot. Just organizing what future events might look like in this province. We were trying very hard to make it the first Indigenous-led Olympics in history, and just the great pleasure of working with Jack, and you really have a gem here. I mean, I think you try to get him to stay as mayor as long as you can, because just his ability to move from talking to somebody on the sidewalk to talking to ministers and senior bureaucrats was just seamless. And really understanding reconciliation and what's good for a community is fantastic. So I'd like to give your mayor another round of applause if that's okay. And I do want to thank Mandy Russo and the Whistler Institute. Mandy's been fantastic to work with, and I know events are just nerve-wracking to put forward. Like, anybody going to show up? If they show up, are they going to like it? And so she's done a fantastic job. So can we have a round of applause for her? It is an old politician's trick to have about 5 rounds of applause before you speak, because then you can't help yourself when you don't like what I say. Okay, so Democracy in Science, it's a very long title, and we would say there's going to be a door prize if somebody can remember the title at the end of the talk. But I will try to meander my way through this and just to see if I can make the connection for you. I also am happy to talk. I have a kind of a focus talk that I'd just like to walk you through and provoke some thoughts and thinking about how you make decisions on a small scale, or municipalities, or thinking about larger decisions, because we're all in the middle of a great hurricane of what do we do next. But also happy to talk about anything else. There's questions at the end, so we can talk about the talk, or if you want to talk about other things. I still am in a lot of contact with, still talk with a lot of provincial and federal ministers, and kind of got my finger on the pulse of some things. So if you have questions that you're thinking about and maybe you'd like to talk about as a group, I'm also happy to do that. So my first slide is kind of how we're all feeling right now. Let's see. So we have south of the border, you maybe, his name, Trump is up there. We have, the kind of daily announcement and withdrawal of tariff threats, but it does unfortunately look like that's going ahead. We do have those other problems that we were so focused on for a long time, climate change, housing, all kinds of things that are going on in communities that cut across all levels of government. And then, of course, in the middle of a federal election, just a little cherry on top of what we're thinking about, which one of these two fellas is going to be our next prime minister. And that's a lot of pressure. And like the amount of just waking up and not being like this is, if I run into somebody like that, I think there's something, that I should be having the breakfast they're having. But I do think we're kind of like this to some extent. There's so much stuff coming at us It used to be Polyev yelled at Trudeau, Trudeau felt bad, and we kind of all understood that, and then they all changed their brands, right? Like all of a sudden Polyev's the nice guy, Trudeau's gone, we have the guy who's a banker, like who is best to lead us? And then, a bunch of other side players, Elizabeth May is still there, we have Jagmeet Singh too, like is that the person I talked, so all that stuff is going on ourselves individually. However, in the middle of all that, we still have to make community decisions, right? We got our own stuff going on inside of us about how we feel, our own economic well-being, how our family's doing. We have the regular stuff of aging and health and all those things, but we still have to make decisions together. So small groups, that can be tough. Like if you're running a business or you're in some kind of association, or if you're some kind of community organization, you're in a co-op or a nonprofit, you're still having pretty intense discussions, and all of that individual stuff kind of comes into those discussions, the worry. We have your council here, all right, many in the room today, nice to meet everybody. But these are pretty tough times to make council decisions. Jack alluded to COVID. I was elected in 2018, and 2019 was an incredible year in the city of Vancouver. We had lots of revenue, smooth sailing, and we're starting to really think about big things like Olympics. 2020 hit, and then at the city of, everywhere, but COVID hit big cities particularly hard. I'm quite good friends with Olivia Chow, who's still digging out from a $1.9 billion deficit from her city that's not allowed to run a deficit. At the beginning of COVID, when it first started to hit, everybody was freaked out. What does physical distancing mean? Like, can I go see somebody? How many people in my bubble today, if you remember all that? But cities took a massive hit. Our revenue dropped by about 20%. I had to lay off 20% of the staff, 8,000 people in the city without strikes. And all cities were dealing with this. And our West Coast cities did better than many. But so those are kind of what crises can do to community decision making. And then, helpfully, opposition folks were saying everything is broken and it's all your fault. And that's really not, I think, the best way to make community decisions. It's a great way to score political points, and I've been guilty of it myself. But I think now that I'm kind of out of it, I think, well, we have to have some kind of better approach to fixing our communities, because just figuring out what's good for me and not for you is not enough these days, especially when the economy may get to be pretty rocky. This is the new provincial legislature, or the new government. They're trying to make decisions. We have Bill S7 coming in, or S7, which is the grants extraordinary powers to the government. I'm thinking, well, why are you doing this? There must be something that's really bad that's going on, that if you feel you need these powers, because they are kind of like emergency powers, but we're not having those discussions. We're still locked in opposition calling government names, and we need more than that from everybody. And finally, this is the Central Block that will be reopened in like 2150 or something, but that's where I sat for 7 years. They actually have to take every brick out and then clean it and put it back. That's what they did in the other buildings they fixed up. So, spent 7 years locked in a room with Pierre Poilievre, so I kind of know him pretty well. I met Carney a few times. Jagmeet, of course, I know well, so I do kind of know those personalities. And it is all about kind of yelling at each other, and I don't. And so that's why I'm trying to combine the idea of democracy, which is this kind of group decision making, with more of a scientific approach. Okay, so I've got my little symbol for democracy, and I have my little symbol for social science, because I'm a social scientist. But social science is really just taking all the great work that the physicists and chemists and biologists do and try to apply it to human behavior. Started with sociologists, and then political scientists like me came along and said, oh, we can do regressions and all those kind of things with human behavior, and economists are good at it. So I take, as a social scientist, I think, well, how can I apply this to democracy? And My thought is democracy is really just making community decisions. It's not having one person or a couple of people making these decisions. It's trying to have your whole community involved in decision making. And so what I noticed through my 11 years in public life is that people are really good at either telling you what they want for themselves. But, especially lobbyists. I mean, I was the shadow minister for natural resources for a little while, and the day I got that file, my hallway was filled with oil and gas lobbyists. Very good, companies are very good at telling you what they want. Often the public is like, I want my taxes lower, I want this property rezoned or something like that. But they're not very good at telling you, identifying community problems. And when they do that, they actually usually come with solutions first, rather than identifying what the problem is. And that's what scientists are really good at. So I think in combination, if we can take the scientific approach of identifying and understanding problems before we race forward with solutions, I think we'll be in much better shape. But that, from my experience, is rarely done. So when you're doing this, you really have 5 steps, and I like the kind of 5-step approach. I like cooking, so if it's more than 5 steps, I kind of get in trouble. So 5 is good for me. Picking an issue and defining. You pick an issue first, the thing that you're concerned about or you think that might be problematic, and then you really try to define and measure that problem. And I'll walk you through a little bit of what I have a bunch of examples that I'll walk you through what that might look like. Okay, so once you've defined and measured your problem, which is actually harder than it looks, then you try to determine why the problem is happening. And like I look at this room and the few folks I met on the way in, every community, this community is so well equipped to do this kind of work. You've got your mayor, municipal councilors mixed in with people that do accounting and run businesses and are experts in various areas. There is enough expertise really in any room to kind of walk through these steps and really tackle community problems rather than sitting and arguing about what do I want, I don't like you, or I don't like what you want. More thinking about what is the nature of the problem we're trying to investigate. And then go off and get information and try to figure out why this problem is happening. The stage that isn't often done is, you often hear about cost-benefit analysis, but actually making decisions about how a community is going to move forward involves a whole bunch of considerations. So whether the thing you're trying to do is going to fix your problem or not is really important. Are you choosing effective solutions? How much these things are going to cost is very important, but so are things like equity. We're going to choose to make a decision where we're going to give a tax break or something. How does that actually look across the community? Who benefits, who loses, and you really have to build that into your decision-making process, because often it's the same group that wins and it's the same group that loses. And if that continues, your community starts to break down. So, you can't win all the time, but you also can't lose all the time. If you start losing all the time, then you're going to start to disengage from your community. You're going to say, well, this isn't actually my community at all. This is a bunch of people that are taking advantage of me, and that we have all kinds of examples around us. In fact, that's what reconciliation is really all about, is understanding that, Indigenous people in this country have been on the losing end of things for so long that, there's a disengagement. And our reconciliation now is about thinking about that every time we make some kind of community decision. It's not just governments, it's communities too. That's why we have the DRIPA Act based on UNTRIP, and I think that's required of every piece of government legislation now in the province, is that relationship is front and center when you're making your considerations. At the federal level, every piece of policy advice given to the federal government has to have a gender-based analysis plus. That is actually a requirement for any kind of government policy decision, because women have lost out for so long from federal policy that this last government recognized that and made it a condition on the decision-making process. So from those kind of national and provincial level processes that have built these considerations in, we should also be doing this at the community level. It does make it more complicated, but I do think you will get better solutions at the end and more community buy-in. And my old professor, Patty Smith from SFU, would say success breeds success. And I actually think Whistler is like a really good example. You know, there's tensions here like there are in every community, but it does seem like this community really hums along pretty well. Like, you don't hear a lot of stuff coming out of Whistler like you do out of Vancouver or Surrey or you know, other municipalities. And why I love coming here is that I grew up in a very small town in rural Nova Scotia, where, you know, you never locked your doors. My dad used to yell at me when I took the keys out of the car, you know. So like there is this sense of community that I automatically feel every time I come up here, and I kind of forget until I'm walking around and like, oh wow, you guys got something good here. You should keep on doing it. And I do think you probably incorporate a lot of this stuff into your decision. So I think you could go out and teach others, but I do want to at least kind of draw this to your attention that this is what you're doing and you might be able to do a little more of. The last two steps is after you've kind of got the problem identified and measured and you think of what the cause is, then you're going to figure out your criteria by which you're going to evaluate it, and then you come up with your options, which is, people really find this exciting, but it's actually probably the most boring part. So I'll walk you through why I think that is, because you only have a certain range of options that you can choose from. So you're really not going to do too much that's, occasionally you get some innovation, but mostly you're going to be borrowing from somewhere else. Finally, the idea is to pursue the best option. So I learned very early on as mayor, is my job as mayor was to get my council to decision as fast as I could. The real job of leadership is to say, we've got a problem, we've got to fix it, here's our options, here's our best way forward. Let's decide now and move forward. Even if everybody's fighting and uncertain and everything, you still have to get people to a decision point. And that is really, the other 4 steps don't matter if you don't commit to doing the work, whatever that is. And that will also influence your decision making. We picked something that we have no authority to do. We don't have any resources to do it. That's going to be problematic. So you need to pick options that are within your range. Okay, so I'm going to do a little local exercise here. So the first thing you do when you're coming up with your problem is I always put it in a too much, too little type of sentence. I say, you know, there's too much traffic on the main street, or too few kids are graduating elementary school. I always try to phrase it in a way that kind of asserts a hypothesis from science. Kind of say, this is what's happening. That's my best guess as to what's happening. Then I go off and measure it. So I can imagine, you hear a lot about healthcare in the province, and had my own relatives to say, I've been sitting in this emergency room forever. I had, a broken finger. I need to get fixed, and it was 5 hours or something like that. And there's all these anecdotes about how bad things are. So I've put your community in here. And I would say, well, if I was concerned about, here's an issue we want to deal with, emergency room wait times at the Whistler Health Center. Wait times at Whistler Health Center are too long. That's kind of my thought that I'm thinking. So what I went is I went to the webpage, the provincial webpage, where it looks at wait times. This is not an annual count. This is just from one day. And I said, well, how bad is it? I'm going through this exercise. How bad is it? Well, on that day, Whistler was 4th in the Vancouver Coastal Health area, which is pretty good. I mean, you're not in Surrey, where you're waiting 9 hours, right? So if you're sitting there and you're in the Whistler, in the Whistler Health Clinic, and you think like, oh, these wait times are really long, it is useful to compare yourself with other places. And the thing is, I know there's the expertise in this room that you can go off and do that. Like, one thing is going off and having a beer or having a coffee, whatever, you just want to vent about something, that's cool. But if you're actually moving towards fixing things, then let's get the data first. So this is, if anybody works in the health center, you'll say, well, that's not right, and it isn't. This is not, like if I was going to do this, if I was going to do this for real, I would go do an annual look at it. I would understand that there's other factors. You know, Whistler is a care center, where Surrey is a whole hospital, all those kind of things. But it is useful to take an initial glance and you say, well, 45 minutes is the average wait time on this day. That's pretty good, you know. But maybe it's not good enough. Maybe you decide that, you know what, like, it's okay that all these other places are worse than us, but that's not really matters. We think we can do better than this. So let's do that. Let's decide still that the wait times at the center are too long. So the next thing you do is you try to determine why the problem's happening. So the best thing to do would be to get information from the other places that are better than you are, right? Let's say, well, what are they doing in, I think it was Langley. What are they doing in Langley Memorial, where your wait time is 10 minutes, that we're not doing? And so you look at possible factors. You know, why are Whistler ER wait times longer than those at other ERs? Why are they longer than why are we not number one? You might look at things like, oh, it's got to do with our local population. Like, our catchment area is way bigger than the Langley one, so it's not, and we can't really do anything about that. It might be a shortage of doctors, like within the ER. It might be a number of ER nurses. It might be that the types of injuries matter. So maybe Whistler's center is different than everywhere else because you're getting different types of injuries and ailments. Or it might be that you just lack a certain type of equipment or something. But you can go and look at, say, at other places that have shorter wait times and figure out how is this going to happen. Now, you think, well, where do we get that information? I bet you have so many people from Vancouver Coastal Health, like in and around the Whistler area, that they would know how to get this information. All you need is like a bunch of folks that are concerned about it. And if you don't know them or your friends don't know them, somebody knows somebody that can kind of make a very educated guess as to why our times are a little longer than the other times. So you do that, you figure it out, you have your best guess. That's all science is, by the way. Science is just your best guess. It's like you get all these people in lab coats with all their pots bubbling away, or their, you know, and really they're still dealing with probabilities. That you know, I'm a 99, you know, you say this in the polling, 95% chance that this is correct, right? It's still, science is still the best guess, unless you're kind of in physics where it's a little better guess, you know, gravity. But most science is still a very good guess. I used to have a friend who he was trying to figure out why salmon cells are pink, and like what is the protein that sticks their, you know, what they're eating to their cells, right? And he can never say for certain what does it. He could only say what are the chances that this is the correct thing. So even if you're doing kind of amateur back of the envelope guesses, it's still the best guess your group is doing, which is fine. Okay. So then what you do is you choose your criteria by which to evaluate your options. So I have a star by effect on this because there's no use picking things that aren't going to work, right? So if you're trying to cut down ER times and you decide you want to build you know, it'd be nice to have a children's play park outside the hospital, it's probably going to make your wait times longer. So you should make sure that you're limiting yourself to things that are going to reduce the wait times. The second thing is you really got to think about how much it's going to cost. So, you know, a lot of my students work on this one, and they say, well, we need more doctors, we need more doctors, we need more doctors, we need to pay more doctors, and that's probably true. But you probably can't hire enough doctors to get things down. So then the provincial government said, well, we're going to have nurse practitioners. We're going to create a special category of nurse that actually takes a lot of pressure off doctors. Then all of a sudden they said, you know what, pharmacists can prescribe things. So they took different kind of policy measures to reduce the pressure on family doctors so they could take more people, and that kind of substitutes for hiring more doctors, right? So it's kind of, that's what I mean, like the doctors are always going to say hire more doctors and pay them more, but you know, community members to say, we know what the answer is, it's hire more doctors, hire more doctors, hire more doctors. There could be something else that's just as effective or even more effective and cost less. So that's really something, and I know when I was talking to constituents, if they could come to me with a well-reasoned explanation as to what they wanted, I was much more inclined to help and try to push as much as I could. Next thing that people don't think about too much, but you really need to, is administrative difficulty, which is about as exciting as it reads there on the page. But like, how hard is it to do? I mean, I found this as mayor. If I had to get the federal government, the provincial government, the 3 nations, the municipality, all involved in getting something done, I'm like, this is never going to happen. So like on housing, how I raised so much money, I just went to the feds directly and I just cut out the province. I talked to Prime Minister Trudeau and I said, I want to deliver housing just as much as you do. Why don't you just start giving the money to me directly and I'll go off and buy the stuff. And he said, okay, you're a municipality, you're very, you know, you've got a AAA credit rating, you've got CFOs, you're a reliable organization, we'll give you the money, you tell us what you bought, we're good. Then they started, the province kind of said, oh, why don't we do that with childcare? Instead of getting all these, you know, individually negotiating with all these nonprofits, why don't we just give the municipality a huge chunk of childcare money, and then you go off and do all that work? Because you know everybody already, you know what building it should be in, we don't know that stuff. So the fewer levels of government that are involved, the easier it is. So that's something you should consider when you're pushing for solutions. Community support is critical. Believe me, I built a whole bunch of rental housing, I'll talk about in a bit, in the west side of Vancouver. Not very happy about that. West side voters were not very happy about me pushing to get rental housing built in their part of the city, but I thought it was so important for the long-term health of Vancouver that I was willing to not listen to as much to that segment of the city, and you know, they didn't like it much in the ballot box later on. But level of support does matter, and sometimes as a politician, you gotta think, well, even if it's gonna be tough, you gotta do this thing. You try to explain it as much as you can, but this is such a critical thing to know when you're going in, because sometimes when you're talking about solutions, you can build in extra bits that kind of make it a little more gentle on the people that get hit the hardest. The last bit, as I mentioned, is equity. So determine who benefits and loses the most. You know, I remember I was on the Heritage Committee. I remember I used to sit beside Stéphane Dion, which is really funny because we were the 2 political science professors and we had like the worst positions on the committee. Like he was always just grumbly because he'd kind of fallen a bit. And you know, we always thought about you know, determining who benefits and who loses the most. And Stephen Harper wanted to bring in a tax credit for people to take music lessons, which we thought it was a really great idea. You know, I'm a musician, I think it's really good, except it was, you only got it back if you made enough income to pay, you're paying taxes. If you're below the threshold where you're not really paying income taxes, you couldn't get the credit. So we said, hey, wait a second. You know, the folks that probably need the music lessons the most are the poor kids. And so you should make a fully refundable tax credit. It was, you know, so that thinking about equity is really important. And when you're making community decisions, you need to think about equity too. You should, because that's bringing more people on board. So that's a lot of stuff, right? You're thinking about an issue that's important to you. You're trying to turn it into something you can actually measure and assess. You're thinking about how you're going to evaluate it, and then you're going to come up with options. It does sound boring as hell, but it actually is quite invigorating when you start doing it, because it feels like real work. And if you've sat around in groups long enough, you kind of know if you don't have a framework to your thought, you kind of get stuck. You get stuck in kind of back and forth arguments that seem intractable. But once you break it up with a framework like this, you move away from the arguments of who gets what or who doesn't. You get more into discussing the nature of the problem and the nature of the solution. Okay, we're going to go through 5 steps and I'll give you a break. So the next thing to do is devise effective options. And you really only have 9 choices. First one is really you let the market solve everything. Right? And we pretty well do this on housing in Canada. You know, in Vancouver, which has got $1 trillion of real estate, 96% of it is privately owned, and it's all privately built. Right? There's no government companies kind of cranking out, there's nonprofits that own and operate sometimes, but our housing market solution, our housing provision solution is all market-based. That may be a bit different here, but that's in Vancouver, it's in Toronto. We really don't have any social housing. Like in Hong Kong, 70% of their housing is, government has something to do with it. Most European countries, 25%, but in Canada, it's almost entirely market-driven. So, and I'm going to talk more about housing a little bit as we go, but market options is always something you can do, right? And it's something that's often preferred by many, and it is certainly the easiest thing to do. People buy it, they set the price, that's cool. But that may not work. So then what happens is, if that doesn't work, you may be asking for a symbolic gesture. And this would be the mayor, you want to encourage cycling, so the mayor decides, I'm going to cycle to work every day, right? And you see the mayor cycling along, you think, oh, maybe I'll do that, right? It's a symbolic gesture. That's another easy way. It's an easy thing to ask for politicians to kind of stand up and say something, or for you to stand up. I love, what's it called, critical mass? Critical Mass in Vancouver, every Friday at the end of the month, they get together and they ride their 1,000 bicycles down all around the downtown. It's just they said, we want to encourage cycling in the city, and this is what we're going to do. They came together as a group, they want more cycling, they went through all their options, they thought, why isn't there more cycling? But they said, instead of just letting people do their own thing, we're going to have a symbolic gesture that's going to convince other people to join in. That's a good solution. Advertising, everybody does that, everybody sees it, but it is something, if you think that one of the most effective things that lowered the smoking rates was to have smoking kills on cigarette packages, right? That is something that did have some measurable effect. You can do this as a community group too. You can do it as a local government, you can do it at any level. This just to advertise, to tell people, to try to get them to change their behavior. As we go up the ladder, it's harder for community groups to do anything beyond really advertising. Once you get into government regulations, those types of things, you really have to get government officials involved because it often involves legislation or expenditure. Governments give tax breaks. That's a very easy way to change people's behavior and to accomplish something that you decide is important to accomplish. Regulation, so when governments say you can't do stuff, and if you do, we're going to fine you or put you in jail or something. Taxes, we're going to get you to reduce your emissions by taxing every liter of gas that you spend with a carbon tax, and we'll give you a rebate, although that didn't work, or it's gone anyway. Public ownership, we don't think about that as much as we used to, but public ownership is when you decide that the market just can't handle it, no matter what we're doing, it's not happening, so we're going to do it ourselves. And one great example of public ownership is hospitals. My great-great-uncle was a country doctor, and we still have his little bag up in our house in Nova Scotia, and he went to medical school for 2 years and just said, I'm a doctor, and then went around and, fixed people up for chickens. That's kind of what he did. And I'm telling you, this kit was not very big. There was a saw in it. There was a bunch of different, different kinds of opium of some kind. There was various instruments. You don't know what, but that was privately provided healthcare, right? And often there were not rural hospitals at all. There would be one in Halifax, but so often the operating table was the kitchen table. So then eventually people said, I think we can do better than this guy who, he'd been through World War I as well, so he had shell shock, and he was like not the doctor you wanted showing up at your house, from what I could see. Anyway, various provincial governments said, we can do better, and so public ownership for hospitals was their answer. There are private hospitals, but it wasn't as embraced as much here as it is in other places. The last one, the last most extreme measure, we've all been through it. It's when governments declare states of emergency and they can do extraordinary things like lock you in your house. Like that is the most extreme thing, and actually it's quite a unique generation that's grown up. I think of like a lot of my students, they've been through like the most coercive thing that a government can do to you. is say, you are not free to move around, you cannot travel, you can't go into restaurants, you can't operate your business. Like, that is about as coercive as it gets. And I remember when Bonnie Henry announced COVID, she cried at her first press conference. And everybody thought, that's weird. But it's like, she cried because she knew what was coming. Because not only do you have this incredible imposition on residents, citizens, you also have a backlash afterwards. And it's pretty brutal. People don't like being told that their liberties are limited. And that is, I think we're a little bit past that, but boy, the anger post-COVID was, I think, legitimate because people have been through a hard time, but hopefully, I think we're almost through it. And still angry? Okay. That's okay, though. You got tariffs to worry about now. Like, you don't you can be angry about that. These are your only choices, which if you're going to change things, this is pretty well all you can pick from. There's different definitions of this, there's different kind of minutia within it, but really those are your only choices, and usually we kind of hang around the middle, right? We usually kind of go from advertising to taxes. We don't really do much else, but extraordinary times often call for extraordinary things. And that's why I'm curious about the new provincial legislation. What is so extraordinary that you have moved all the way over to basically government takeover? What is it like that? That's what this act empowers the government to do. Why? Do you know stuff that we don't know? I think you should be explaining it. Through COVID every day, Adrian Dix went up and spouted his, baseball stats of who was in the hospital and who wasn't, and we had an explanation as to why this was important. But we're not getting an explanation now, and we should. Right. So we get back to your local hospital. You have a couple of choices that might drop your wait times. You can increase the supply of care. So you can build new hospitals. You can allow private facilities, which is a hot debate always in Canada. You can hire more ER doctors. You can hire more ER nurses. You can transport people elsewhere, right? You can say we're going to helicopter you down to Vancouver or whatever. So there's a bunch of things you can do in there to increase the supply of care. Or you can decrease demand. That's the other option. So if you want to lower your wait times, well, if just fewer people show up to the hospital, to the emergency room, then you're going to decrease your demand. So you can have more family doctors, for example, which is a big push. All of a sudden, instead of going to the emergency room, you're calling your family doctor or you're seeing them instead. And that is a huge benefit of more family doctors. You can treat chronic illness because most of the folks that turn up to the ER often are, and many of them are connected to a chronic illness that's untreated, like blood pressure, heart disease, diabetes, those types of things. So you can have programs to treat chronic illness. In the province here, we advertise wait times. I get this thing in my elbow, and I'm like, I don't know. What's the wait time at Surrey Memorial? 9 hours? I'm not going. Right? So that is actually an attempt to lower the number of people that are going to the ER. It's down the scale. It's kind of advertising in some ways. You're letting people know how long they're going to wait, and they're not going to go. You can improve safety measures here, like probably lots of skiing injuries, I would think. And you think, well, maybe if you take measures to make people safer, bike helmets was a big thing that went away somehow. But I mean, there was a huge debate in Vancouver where everybody had to wear a bike helmet and cops were arresting people without bike helmets. And then everybody just decided they're not wearing bike helmets anymore. But that kind of cut down the number of head injuries, which are terrible things. Telehealth is another one. Like, I can call somebody. Instead of me guessing how bad off I am, I can call somebody and ask them, and they can tell me whether or not I need to go to the ER. These are all things but you have to pick using these criteria about which one would be best. So that's a lot, right? That's a lot of stuff. But then you have a convincing thing to bring forward to your community or to your elected officials. It doesn't have to be perfect, but it shows that it's more than just complaining. And I do think it's worth the effort. And often, good governments, they will help you, right? They'll actually, well, we have somebody that might be able to help you put together this or think through it. And I know like in some cities, for example, they have community planners that they just actually turn the planner over to the community group, and the planner works for the community group and not for the city. They just bring expertise, or architects and those types of things. So they can help you with this type of thing. My feeling is that you'd really get involved in this if something was really, really, really bothering you. So if it's, it has to be pretty intensely bothering you in order to fix it. And often you get folks that experience something terrible that get involved. So although I was mayor at the time, I mean, for me, why I got so involved in drug policy is that like 2 of my family members died of overdoses. So I thought, well, I can't, not do something and take risks, and let's see what we can do. A controversial thing because nobody really wants to talk about it, but I thought, it's something that means a lot to me and to my family, so I'm going to get involved. And I'm sure you have issues like that too. There's things that you feel very personally strongly about, and things that have maybe bothered you for a long time, or something new that's popped up. And I think that this kind of approach will help you help you kind of think through the issue and problem, but also help you make very, I think, concrete proposals to your other community members or to elected officials. All right. So the last one is pursue the best option. And essentially, you can just grid this all out. And I'll show you how this works in a second. But you're basically taking the thing that's happening now, your 3 options that maybe 3 you've come up with, and you just evaluate them by each of those criteria that you've picked. And it does sound like, oh man, what the hell? It's Thursday night. Why am I talking about grids and policy change? I could be, somewhere else. But I'm hopefully, I do think this is, this kind of change is something I'm hoping that you'll kind of ruminate on. It's not something you're going to maybe you'll walk out and do it right away, but maybe it'll stick in your mind and you think next time you see a headline, this is often where it comes from, and I'll show you some, that always has the solution without any analysis, like it's not doing anybody any favors. Kind of uninformed kind of media headlines or a politician is blurting something out, and we're all very familiar with that these days, without analysis is not going to get us anywhere. You might fluke out and do it, but a systematic way is much better. All right, so I've given you a framework. I'm going to apply that a bit more as I go along, but I was just going to ask you if you have any questions about this, and then, second half we can go to or whatever, or anything else. We've got a question right there, white striped shirt.
Thank you for this. I'm Ann Duffy. I'm a resident in Whistler, and we're now in these much more complicated times, municipally, provincially, nationally, internationally, and there's a lot, including you have the circle on climate change. There's so much that's embedded in that. Where do you see democratic decision-making going, where we're actually bringing, I think you had it in the equity line around how is this affecting
Others. Yep.
But short of personifying nature and the environment, like how, I guess my question is 2 things. One is, where do those layers and aspects come into the decision-making?
Yep.
And 2, because that's maybe more creative, where do you see it going? Because we have now multiples of things we have to divinely understand.
Yes, thank you. So the question was how do you see this going forward? Because there's not only new environmental conditions, there's so many things that are overlapping. And I think, for me, it can only go this way. Because, I was really happy to grow up in the 80s and 90s, and that was really governments had, often quite a lot of money. There was, the economy was keeping growing and growing and growing, but it's a little less than that now, right? We're going to have fewer resources to use and fewer resources to make mistakes with. So I just think, again, I was always a cap and trade fan, not a carbon tax fan, but that's a massive mistake, right? To institute a whole national program and then only to kind of nibble bits out of it and then cancel it. That's what we call a policy disaster, right? That's when you've got good intentions, right? You think I'm going to, and I actually know the people that designed the carbon tax. They work with me at SFU. And I always said in the meetings, I'm like, I don't think people are going to go for this, guys. I think it's a big mistake for politicians to remind people like every couple of days that they're paying this new tax. I actually don't think that's a very good idea. I get your intention, but I think we have to go back and look at different options. Because the thing about the stakeholder and community support, even if people support you on climate change, they're going to be susceptible to pressure against this thing. And it's turned out to be the case. And I used to go to the House of Commons and watch Pierre Poilievre, because I kind of enjoy watching him speak. I don't really like what he's saying, but I do like watching him as a speaker, at least in the House of Commons. And that guy is the most effective opposition leader in probably the history of the country. There's one other guy, Arthur Meehan, who was pretty successful, and he was Mackenzie King's kind of foil, but Poilievre is just very, very good at his job. Your job as an opposition member is to knock the other person out on the other side of the house. That's how it's set up. And he took out Trudeau. Good job. However, and Trudeau really handed him this gift of a carbon tax that everybody knew what it was. They couldn't see the effect of it. Are we lowering carbon? I don't know. Is it better or worse? I'm not sure. But man, I got to pay this every time I go to fill up or get any kind of petrol product or any kind of So the answer is you kind of got to go back to the drawing board and think of those 5 things. Climate change is not going away. It's getting worse, and it's going to get worse, especially since we're going to be burning more carbon, putting more carbon in the atmosphere. But you've got to go back and kind of use these steps. That's it. And resetting is very hard. I'm a drug policy advocate. Man, that got killed. Right? Decriminalization got yanked out. Safe supply got yanked out. Okay, so what do? Well, the drug deaths are still going. There's still 1 person a day dying in Vancouver. So the problem has not gone away, but we have to go back and reset, put our egos, to the side and say, well, what did we get wrong on doing this? What can we put in place that, in my mind, are going to save lives, are going to reduce carbon? What do you do in these new, in these new conditions, right? And that's a hard thing to do. It's a hard thing to reset, but you've got to adapt to conditions, but you can't let go of the original problem. It's the climate can't take what's happening, and it's showing. I have a whole bunch of students working on wildfires. They're working on, the intensity of the fires now. They're looking, we were talking about insurance is not, in California you can't get insurance for your home. These are real problems because of climate change that are not going to go away. And so how do we do it in a way that bring the people that were opposed to the carbon tax, how do we bring them over in a way that they were obviously affected in a very bad way and, convinced by a very successful politician to not like this, but how can we deal with this? And it's up to all the leaders to get together and do that again on a whole bunch and you're always doing this. You're always reinventing things. Sometimes something works for a while and then it doesn't work and you have to go and do something else, but it's a bad one. And why I'm teaching undergraduate students for the first time since 1995, and why I put so much effort into teaching them because they're the ones inheriting all this stuff. And it's really hard. What's tariffs going to do for my job fortunes? Not going to help them. Housing's already expensive. Climate change, great, I got to deal with that. The amount of pressure we're putting on these kids is not great. And so it's up to us to kind of, try to do what we can to find solutions and for political leaders to sometimes do things that are going to get you in trouble, but it's a great question. But I still think this is the framework. I still think about understanding the problem and coming up with solutions that kind of meet these conditions are important. That was a very long answer, but thank you for the question. Oh, how about way in the back there? Yes?
So you talked about community support, and I was wondering how do you address misinformation with that?
Yeah.
We're exposed to so much,
Yeah.
but we get snippets or anecdotes or
Yeah.
we're so influenced by it. So.
Yeah, I'm kind of old school on that one. I studied voter turnout for a long time, and the most effective way to get somebody out to the polls is to go and talk with them. And door knocking and stuff works very, very well. It's really the only Like, all these academics, especially in the United States, have spent like hundreds of millions of dollars testing what works, and nothing works better than a face-to-face conversation. And so I do think that that's, like, especially in a community like Whistler, like, you have that opportunity all the time, right? And it used to be like, I was really lucky. I grew up with my grandparents, my great uncle. Like, I hung around. My mom ran a hospice, so we were kind of living in a hospice. So the oldest woman I met was 108, and she was very lucid, so she could tell you what was happening. Like, oh yeah, 1910, this is what we did, And so, like, face-to-face communication was so important. If you think about how Tommy Douglas got Medicare in Saskatchewan, I mean, it was all farmers talking to each other. Like, hey, I broke my leg and I lost my farm, that kind of thing. And then they funded this change. So we get a bit caught up in the social media thing, where one good conversation can probably help get people at least questioning what they're listening to. But that's a great question. That's what I would think. I don't know, like, doom scrolling. I mean, I get caught up in it too, but it's just like, I don't think this is doing me any good. Like, I don't think I'm learning anything here. It's kids you got to worry about, though. What I noticed in my classes is kids don't have their phones out. Like, I thought that was kind of neat. Kids, like, I don't know, 19, but they don't, like, I can't be that good a speaker. Like, it's got to be them, right? So, but you had another hand there, I saw? Yeah, sorry.
Well, I think I had a similar question, because I thought your 2 points about both carbon tax and potentially the drug policy are not necessarily failed application of your framework, but a failed understanding of the majority of the population of the value of those policies. So
Yeah.
it's not to say they lack value, they don't have social merit. They may be actually in the best interest of the vast majority of the population.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's really around communication and countering misinformation. Is it sort of the next step in that implementation, I think? But I mean, that's a question a lot of us probably are struggling with these days.
Yeah.
The amount of misinformation that's flying.
I like one of my favorite takes. I don't want to pick on Pierre Polyev, but he's been so mean to me that I don't mind saying. But, like, when I watch him explain why he's not getting security clearance, I think, like, I have a friend of mine in Parliament used to say, "Oh, you're explaining, you're losing," right? Unless somebody can get it right away. So I think you're right. It's about framing things, but also there's probably chunks of it. Like, I don't think on carbon tax stuff people connected. I mean, it's not new stuff, new ideas, but I don't think they connected the rebate with what they were paying. Like, and the opposition made sure you didn't connect it, right? But I do think that that's part of it. But like, I also think, like, we can't be too precious about our ideas. If people aren't buying it and your opposition is beating you over the head with it, then you got to switch. Like, and I think that's what happened with Democrats in the U.S. They're like, if we call this guy an idiot long enough and just think people are going to come around, it didn't work. So, if it's the right idea, but it doesn't get implemented, then it probably wasn't the right idea. Because it's that whole package of 5 things you've got to really do. Yeah?
How do you think about public participation in decision-making processes and actually getting to decisions?
Yeah.
I think that's a big problem facing now.
Yeah, and it's... Yeah. Yeah, the question is, how do you feel about public participation? I mean, it is the most important thing, really, to get buy-in, is having people see themselves in the discussion. Having something new land on you without any idea that it's coming is not a great way to introduce, especially if it's a tough thing. So it is what democracy is. And you don't really have any way around it. We've just kind of forgotten the art of it. Again, it's mostly that we're falling into the online world where we should be talking in our communities. And I know that sounds so old school, but I actually have an example that's coming up that kind of explains how folks fix kind of a local hospital problem by doing just that. So talking to each other is the most important thing you can do. Maybe one more.
Let's hear your talk.
Keep going? Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, good. Okay. Well, you enjoyed it, I hope, or else you just wanted this over faster. I don't know. Okay. Okay, so there's this, I love CBC Ideas. Like, I didn't have a TV forever, and I was like, all right, CBC Ideas is on. And so they did this great interview with this guy, John McKnight. Have you ever heard of him? He's dead now, but he's a sociologist from Chicago who, was really big on this community stuff we're talking about. And so the issue, he went into a particular community and he was talking to local groups that were concerned about community health. And I paraphrase what the problem was they found, but it's again, health, I don't know, some kind of kick when I was writing this, but local ER visits are higher than ER visits in neighboring areas. They're like, we have this new hospital, it's great, it's good, but, and then, somebody put up their hand and said, but our ER is always crammed and the one, 10 blocks over isn't. So why is that the case? So they asked the question, well, why do some local people go to an ER and others do not? And what they did is they just had circles of people and they said, have you been to the ER lately? Oh yeah, why'd you go, why'd you go, why'd you go? And then they had a bunch of academics or just one academic who went to the hospital and said, can I look at the reasons for intake? And so they found, this little community group with the help of one academic, found the top 7 reasons for visits to the local emergency room. Car accidents, kind of normal. Assaults, they were in a kind of very poor part of Chicago, so that was common. Other accidents, bikes and stuff. Chest problems, normal medical stuff. Alcohol, drugs. Last one though, dog bites. That was the 7th highest reason for why people were showing up to the ER. Right, and they're like, well, you wouldn't find that in all these communities, but because they had this community knowledge, that's why like indigenous, knowledge is so important. Somebody who's been on the land for 10,000 years is going to notice stuff that we don't. The people living in that neighborhood knew exactly why that was happening, because there's stray dogs all over the place, and the civic officials weren't connecting it, but people were getting bitten, and it was the 7th most common reason why people were in the ER. Right, so they use this community discussions, pre-internet, pre-anything else, just people talking in coffee shops and bars. And so I'm going to show you how the grid works. So they had a bunch of options that they were contemplating. One was do nothing, just let the dog bites happen, and we know that now and we can be smug about it. The next one is we can get a new hospital. We can lobby really hard to try to get a brand new hospital. Another one was we can reduce the speed limit, because that was up there and they thought there was something we might be able to do. The last one is they could capture stray dogs. And then they used this grid and they said, well, let's think about the effectiveness of this. Will it reduce ER visits? Well, doing nothing won't do that. And actually, getting a new hospital won't reduce visits, it'll just move them over to another hospital. So you'll actually just have the same number of visits. Reducing the speed limit would probably help. And definitely capturing stray dogs would help. When they got to the lower cost, do nothing was expensive because it was locally expensive and it was hurting people. A new hospital was not an option. Reducing the speed limit was a good idea. They could afford it. And capturing stray dogs they could afford. You can see how you work along here. What they got to eventually is that the best thing they could do in their power as a local community group was to capture stray dogs, and that's what they did. They got permission from the city, they got folks trained up with equipment, and they just went out and they captured the dogs. They didn't say what happened to the dogs, so I don't like to think about that part. But actually, it dramatically reduced the number of ER visits. It took a lot of pressure off, and it was just the community kind of getting engaged with their local institutions to do that. That story's always stuck with me because it is, you can fancy it up, but it really is the same thing that I'm talking about, right? Like, let's get in and analyze the thing that's really bothering us, and ER visits was a big thing. Oh yeah, are we doing this still?
We're kind of tight on time.
Tight on time, how much time have I got?
Well, like 10 minutes.
10 minutes, does that include the questions too?
We go until 7:30.
Okay. Would you want more questions? Do you want me to go one more example?
We need a few questions.
Questions, all right, I'm good with that.
Keep going, we need some time for questions.
All right.
Go for 10 minutes.
Do you want me to quickly whip through the housing crisis? I am a maritimer, right? So I can talk forever, just to let you know. All right, here's a bunch of headlines. Recent ones, how to fix the housing crisis. Great, that's a great cover. Top story of the year, housing crisis, housing crisis. Believe me, as mayors, you hear that all the time, housing crisis. And I'm like, so what is this housing crisis? Who is in crisis? And so it's a really good idea to kind of to break this down. So I'm going to give you this, which is, well, maybe Canadian home ownership rate is too low. Maybe not enough people in Canada are owning homes. So I'm not talking locally, this is nationally. This is the home ownership in Canada from 1961 to 2021. It is flat. It is, it's in the high 60%. Over 65% of Canadians own their own homes. And then if you look at the age breakdown, folks 75 and older, almost 80% of that age group owns their own home. Not a crisis, right? Actually, pretty good thing. If you look from 40, all the way up, this is actually very high rates of home ownership. It's the lower at like 15 to 24. I don't know if there's an expectation that when you're 16 you're going to own a house, but this is low inheritances or something, I'm not sure. But 25 to 39, yeah, feeling like we're not one of these top groups. So I'm thinking, well, let's dig into this a bit more. Where is the Canadian home ownership rate compared to the rest of the OECD? Well, Canada's right in the middle, that red arrow, at their 68, 69%. And look who's behind us. Netherlands, Finland, Australia, United States, New Zealand, United Kingdom, France, all of those competitor countries or partner countries, wherever they are now, they have lower home ownership rates. And the high home ownership rates is kind of where you'd expect them. Well, Kosovo, you can see why, that economy is recovering after war. Montenegro, Croatia, Serbia, Russia, high levels of home ownership. But really, when you think of us in perspective, it's actually going pretty well. And when you look back here, you think it's probably government policy to have about a 65% or higher home ownership rate. It's kind of like inflation. Governments have these, not secret targets, but kind of implied targets. And I would say this is one of them. So it doesn't make people feel better they're feeling the crunch. So maybe this is the problem. The Canadians are spending too much on housing. And this is the Bank of Canada, there's a housing affordability rate. This is the share of your household income that you put toward your housing-related expenses. And so you can see in the 80s, when my family went bankrupt and lost their house, it was way off the charts. The average Canadian was spending high 60% of their disposable income on housing. And I can tell you the bankruptcy rate was high.
Serving debt mortgage rates of 20%. So it was debt service for a really high.
Well, we've got a housing person in the room, and I've got 3 minutes left, so we can talk about it after. Right. So you can see what happened, though, is it kind of flattened out, right? But now we're coming back to an area where folks are still buying housing, right? They're still purchasing housing, but they're either paying too much to buy or paying way more to buy it, or they're paying too much to rent. This is actually my last slide. So I knew this as mayor, right? I said, the crisis isn't people can't own their own enough housing because in Vancouver, the home ownership rate's about the same as here. It's about 50%. However, in big cities, home ownership rate is always low. In New York, it's 20%. In London, it's 20%. When you have big cities where people want to go there and there's a high turnover, purchasing is lower, renting is higher. So we'd had a practice of building in Vancouver condos. That was kind of the main thing, hardly any rental. So if you look where I came in 2018, 2019, I had kind of a council to wrangle there for a little bit to get them on track. But then we started building, we hit a record unit, about almost 11,000 units in 2022. But I had talked to the real estate developers. I said, can you swing your condos, some of your condos, I'm going to give you like density bonuses, all kinds of stuff. Can you build a lot more rental housing? And so they put the proposals in and we approved them. And you can see one of the biggest jumps is this purpose-built rental housing. So I still kind of use the same analysis to try to figure out how the market should change. But my predecessor I'm not sure, the next guy in line, I don't know if he's going to do this or not. But that was really my priority, was to use the data, hear from the experts, and to try to build as much rental housing. And now you're seeing other cities did this too. We had a good talk between different mayors and built a lot of rental housing, and you're starting to see, with other measures, starting to see rents come down. So I'm happy about that, and hopefully that will help on that line, at least with renters, and maybe even with home ownership. So that's it for me. A little housing blast there at the end, but happy to answer a few questions if you got some. We didn't talk about, yep.
So the new rental housing, there is a lot of new rental housing, but it's very expensive. So it doesn't do anything about affordability.
Oh, you're so wrong.
Except if people go from cheaper to higher, and then the cheaper rental housing becomes available.
Well, I can tell you what we did about that. So part of the deal we made with developers, we said, you build a standalone rental housing, we'll give you extra floors if you make 20% of your units rent controlled. So we approved 25 buildings in the city of Vancouver. I'd say maybe 10 are built now, like quite large buildings, that some of them are built in kits, and they were basically designed that somebody making minimum wage could live in there as long as they wanted, and they're being built now. So I went to the Board of Trade on my first year, and I told them this is what I was going to do, and I'd like them to help, and they came over and helped. Like they took a little bit of a loss in order to get the higher density, but to get those protected units. Like that was key for me, is to say, nobody can you can't work at a Starbucks on the west side of the city and live there. You have to travel in. But these units now that are spotted all around Kits and other parts of the west side, they are affordable forever because they're locked in with rent control. And that was the deal we struck. So I couldn't get all of them. They're called moderate income housing rental proposals, or I can't remember the acronym, but we had a lot of buy-in. And the federal government came in and said, we really like this program, so we will give low-income loans, or low-rate loans to these developers who buy into this program. So it is possible. You've got great success here, right? You've had programs in the past that have been fantastic, country leading. It's because good people put their heads together and grasped the nettle of what the problem was. So it didn't fix it, but found a way for it. And now I talked to Olivia Chow, and now they're doing the same thing in Toronto, putting in rent-controlled units, get the market rent, and the units are spread through the building. They're not like, you don't have any pour doors, you don't have any of that stuff. It's just folks living together. So it's a really good point, but you do have to think about who you're building for, and that's the equity component. Thank you for that question. Other questions? Got another. Can I go to the gentleman with the hat, and I'll move to you?
What is, in your list of 9 levers that you can pull, what is that an example of?
Let's see, what would that be? That would be a tax break, would it? It would be back here.
What was the question?
What lever is the moderate income rental housing? I would say it is a tax. It's a regulation and tax break. You can go higher if you have these units. Somewhere in there. Maybe a grant. We don't give them any money.
No, but you give them density.
Sure. Okay. I'll call it a grant.
Reducing the cost without mortgages for the developers, so there's a financial incentive there.
Yeah, developers did they wouldn't have gone ahead if they didn't. They always told me, condos, we make 15%, rental, we make 6%. So if you can change the incentives that they're more even, we can build the rental. So I'm like, that sounds okay. Yeah, but we had good conversations, right? I was not going in with any evil developer kind of thing. I was like, we got a problem here, we all got to come together. And they were a remarkable community. They get a lot of grief, but they're building all the stuff. So, sorry, we come over to Mr. with the classes.
The question is, framework makes a lot of sense in my mind.
Oh, thanks.
You said not many people on the municipal, provincial, or federal level use that framework. So as a citizen,
Yeah.
what can we do to encourage our elected officials to use that framework to make decisions more than doing things that you say that are happening right now?
Yeah, so I'm really curious about this myself. Since I come back to academia, I've been teaching students how to do this, and they go in, I've trained deputy ministers, so this stuff at the federal provincial level is all buried in cabinet memos, which are secret. So you can't actually see the advice. So I'm FOIing like crazy, and I've got access now to the BC archives where I can go through like a whole year of cabinet documents. Anybody can join me if you want. Like that is, you know, there's no windows, you have white gloves on, and you go through and you see, well, what kind of advice, what's the quality of advice that governments are getting? And so, I mean, my wife's driving me crazy. You think being mayor was bad. Like being somebody that's obsessed with government memos is worse. So, so the thing is to bring it all out, to say like, here's how you're getting your advice. It's not great. And I'm sorry, at the municipal level, I'm sure there's great dedicated municipal people here, but you can't do this kind of analysis because at the municipal level, because all those documents are public right away. So it's like, if you're exploring tough options, you kind of need to have kind of closed discussions first to evaluate options. Like I FOI'd a memo on going to war in Iraq. And then, so the options are kind of hair-raising, and there's a reason why it's a secret cabinet document, because you really don't want that to be the first thing the public sees, right? You kind of need, as elected officials, you're trusted to kind of go and look at this stuff. At the municipal level, we don't really have that mechanism to kind of look at things first. And I do think that's something we could change. And I'm working on to try to advise governments to like change this, because like they often look at cost and effectiveness. They rarely look at anything else. They're starting to, but you don't even know the quality of the advice. The ones I've seen are not great. Like they're not great. But that's it. You get a bunch of goofy academics that go and look at this stuff and try to get a better, it's kind of my dream that we would do better analysis in all levels of government. Yeah?
So it sounds like what you're saying then, the problem with their politics now is not so much the politicians, but the bureaucracy that supports them.
Yeah, they're kind of together. I think bureaucrats are awesome. Like I just think they're such highly skilled, dedicated people. Like working in the city of Vancouver was so great. Just the structure we have for them to work in is flawed. So I think if we can change the structure, it will allow them to flourish, I think. So many smart people working in local government. Like it's a structural problem that, you know, people, like local governments are handling so much stuff they never did in the past, right? Like, you know, pandemics and stuff, like that's not on, you know, encampments of 500 tents. Like that's not, you know, something that local governments used to do. So we need a more sophisticated analysis to do it, to deal with that stuff. How am I doing? Can I get the hook? Oh, great, okay. I saw a hand here and then a hand there. Can I go to you first?
So if I go back to your very first slide,
Oh.
the poor woman pulling her hair out.
I made it worse, didn't I?
Well, the way you have, because now I look at, I mean, a week ago we called an election.
Right.
And right away, all the candidates came out with their little solutions. I'm going to throw a tax break here, I'm going to throw one here.
It's awful.
But there wasn't even time to, well, what are they even trying to fix? What's the problem? To the points you made. What are the options they chose and how did they come up with this? Sometimes it's just throwing this stuff out to the electorate.
Mm-hmm.
And same thing, and the US is even worse, right? Look what's happening there. In fact, they're getting rid of all the bureaucrats. All
Yeah.
the people that are going to do this analysis, they're going to be gone.
Yeah.
What we're going to have are the guys at the top who don't care about any of that, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm more worried now.
Well, yeah, sorry. Yeah, that was my secret mission to make everybody very worried.
No, you laid out, I'm a finance guy, so I
Right.
love this analysis.
Well, business does very well.
I'm worried that no one's going to, I mean, who's going to listen to that?
I think of my great uncle Evan, who I grew up with, who lied about his age to fight on the front lines of World War I, and then he was too old but lied against his age the other way to fight in World War II, and in the middle of it he went through a depression. You know, he's a great old guy and his pants way up here all the time, and he just lovely, but like you learn from folks that have been through bad stuff, right? And this is bad. It's not that bad. Like millions of people, you know, your neighbors going overseas and not coming back. Like we're going to get through this for sure, but it's going to be different. It's just the initial shock and how it's being portrayed. And I've done it myself, but the way This is being the change in the world about how Canadians need revenge on the United States. Like if you think of any other relationship, is it a good idea to start with, I want revenge? I don't think so. I think we should be thinking, how can we grow our economy under these new conditions? It shouldn't be, like maybe it's a new weird relationship with the US. We have 3 choices, US, China, Europe. That's it. Who are we picking? Yeah, but Trump said if we make a deal with Europe, he'll punish us. And he told Europe that too, right? We actually will have to make a choice probably. But when we're saying we're going to cut off the electricity, it's the worst idea. Like it's not coming from the right place. It's like I said, people come out with these solutions, but they're not thinking what the problem for Canada is not enough economic growth. That's going to be the problem, not Americans aren't feeling bad enough or something. Like that's really bad. And the politicians like Ford and all, like you saw what happened. We're cutting off your electricity. Okay, we're going to double the tariffs. You know what? I'm not going to cut off your electricity. Like that's what it's going to be like. It's going to be like this, and we don't like it, but that's the reality. No, my great uncle Evan didn't like the 2 world wars, but we're in a situation that is tough, and we've got to have clear heads about it, or it's going to go worse than, it's going to be probably bad anyway, but it's going to be worse. So it's great. We had, sorry, I had one guy. There we go.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, when you were talking about difficulty of implementation,
Yeah.
you gave the example of saying you had multiple stakeholders,
Right.
multiple levels of government involved, you just recognize that this is never going to happen. And you said that one way that you actually accomplish something was by cutting them out and just going directly to the fence yourself.
Maybe.
There's
Yeah, well, province, yeah.
yeah.
Right, right.
There's that tension in the heart of any kind of democratic governance structure.
There is.
How do you reconcile getting things done and getting things accomplished with the need to involve all the stakeholders and
Yeah.
consultation, all the rest of it?
Oh, I picked the most important ones first. And in Vancouver, it was the 3 host nations. Like, early on, I kind of did a map of all the folks I had to deal with. Nations are right at the top. So, for example, when I was working on the SkyTrain line out to UBC, and the engineers finally came back with a route, before it was public, I went right over to Chief Sparrow of Musqueam, and I said, what do you think about this route? You know, here's the map. The ink's still wet. What do you think? Yeah, it's all right. But we'd like a station here because this land is going to come to us in a treaty, and so I'm like, okay. And then I went back and talked to the other mayors on TransLink, and they decided to put the station there. But that also, having Indigenous folks on your side is a very powerful tool these days. But it can only get there if they're brought in at the beginning, and it may not get there at all, but you have to, and you build up this trust relationship, right? Like, Wayne Sparrow used to call me from his boat on his phone while he was out fishing, saying, I got this problem, could you help me with it? Always, because they're like John Horgan called me once the whole time I was mayor. Like, he used to swear at me on the phone. Like, it wasn't good. The guy is a great premier, but he was like rotten to work with as mayor. And, so I just had to work around him. And then that's too bad, but that's just the way it goes. I think he was pro-pipeline and I was anti. I think that's where that started. But, rest in peace. He was a great fella. But that's it. So understanding the community, like, this group, we can't deal with them, so we'll have to bring them in later or something. Yes, you with the yes.
Where does the
Okay.
lack of education and the lack of respect go? Because it seems to me the ability to objectively evaluate an issue, which we just talked about for the last 2 hours,
Yep.
is completely lacking in our present situation brought on by Trump and tariffs.
Yeah, I mean, I have great faith in people. That's why I'm a Democrat. And I know that folks, I remember when I was first running for office, I used to put Dr. Kennedy Stewart in front of my name, and everybody's like, don't do that. It's like, because it kind of, I don't know, it kind of separates you from other folks. I'm doing it now, but I don't know. But I do think there's an extraordinary, everybody knows their own self-interest. That's a great place to start. They know what they want and what's best for their lives. It's just having forums for them to discuss stuff, right? And that's what, if we're all on our phones all day and we're not talking to the person, it's like an old trope, but really just talking to folks and being willing to listen to them. You know, that's it. And I do think most of the good solutions come from the community anyway. Like, I think if you'd taken the carbon tax to a diverse group of coffee shops and said, what do you think about this? You probably would have had I pay on every tank of gas. You know, like, I think that sometimes we get too fancy, and we should talk about that. And our politics are all oppositional. That's how our institutions are built. Two sword lengths apart, you know? I mean, I hated working in the House of Commons. Like, I could not hear myself. Like, I was trying to talk, and it was just like, rah, you know? But councils are a very different place, you know, and they often lead a lot of stuff. So I don't know. I have a lot of hope. Half full, one quarter full. Sorry, we have one more? Is that you gonna? Okay, one more. Yes, you. The glasses.
I'm just wondering, in terms of like your process, do you consider citizen assemblies valuable in any part of this?
Yeah, I was the academic advisor on the BC Citizens Assembly on electoral reform, and did kind of watch that process work. And I was actually in the room when the Attorney General rigged the whole thing. That it was going along, everybody was pouring their hearts out, and at one point somebody came in and said, oh, we can't do that. And I was like, oh, well, it's not a real Citizens Assembly then. And I just kind of, I'm not taking part in this, and, you know, so it has to be genuine, and I do think they can work, but, you know, I do think probably smaller conversations are what we need these days, and they're easy. And if you come in without your solution, you actually come in with the problem that you're trying to fix without an idea of how to fix it. I think that is a better start. What do you think about the wait room times at the Whistler Health Center? Oh, they're too long. You know, like, oh, we got something in common, even though you're voting for Polyev and I'm voting for Carney. Like, it's something you can agree on, right? So, I don't know. But citizen assemblies, they work other places. I just saw this one get a bit corrupted, and that's problematic, for sure. Great question. Am I done now? I think I'm done.
I think your time's up.
Okay, well, my time's up. Okay, thank you very much.
Stay here.
Oh, stay here? Okay.
I guess it's too late to put him on the ballot, isn't it? Can we send him back to Ottawa to make some sense?
Thanks. Thank you anyway.
So, my name's Sue Adams. I'm a member of the Board of Directors of the Whistler Institute. So it's my pleasure in my notes here to thank Dr. Stewart. But I don't know, I think
it's okay
that's...
with
No,
Okay.
Kennedy, thank you so much for taking time to join us tonight. Our focus at Global Perspective Series is to bring thought leaders and experts to stimulate discussion and learning in our community. More than ever, discussions such as tonight's can provide an important opportunity for our community to attempt to make sense of what's happening in the world around us and how this might affect what we do locally and perhaps even influence change. You spent a lot of time talking about housing. I bet you and Jack, we call him Jack, we call him Mayor Jack, that's fine here, have had lots of discussion on housing because I think Whistler's done some amazing stuff there.
Absolutely.
And he's probably talked to you about that.
Yeah.
So bringing a series like this, we're on our second last speaker series tonight, just doesn't happen magically. There are so many people to thank. Firstly, and Mandy, you've been mentioned already, Mandy Russo, our Executive Director and formidable.
Wow, we got that. There we are.
And she's a formidable team of one. And I must also recognise our board who offers support and ideas on the series and on other activities of the Institute. Many of the directors are here. They're wearing badges. I can't actually see where you all are, but there's a number of them here tonight, and please chat to them as we finish up the evening. A very big thank you to Mayor Jack for your ongoing support. So.
I just like
Are we still getting the applause to your benefit? Okay, where are we at now? 7?
I'm still standing here.
Yeah, okay. Thank you for introducing Kennedy Stewart to the Speaker Committee and helping Mandy with the logistics to bring him to us today, and also for the personal introduction tonight. Thank you, Jack. A big call out to our friends at Arts Whistler for providing the venue and the extra services for us and offering it at the non-for-profit rate. So thank you. There you go.
I didn't start that one.
Earlier on, Mandy had our introductory screen up, which you'll notice that we listed the support we received from community and resort partners. And we could never do that without the education and learning sphere. It's not, we could not do that, what we do, in the education and learning sphere if it wasn't for our major funders, which were displayed on the screen. When we were planning the evening, Mandy said, "So, Sue, how are you going to handle that?" Recognizing the sponsors, because she'd put Bob and I up the front. So I said, well, maybe this is an opportunity for me to reach out and ask for more personal support out of our community. We can't always rely on corporations, governments, and foundations for funding. Whistler has been an amazing place to live, and Bob and I have benefited enormously through the resort success, and we've been able to join in many of the initiatives that make this a world-class resort such a success, but more importantly, a vibrant community. So Bob and I are asking you to consider supporting the Whistler Institute in advancing one of the last legs on our community multi-legged stool. How can you help? It's very easy. Just check out on our website. I remind you that the Institute, well, there we go, make a donation. Yeah. I can't really use those codes very well, but lots of younger people than me in the audience.
We can show you how to use it.
So we are a registered charitable society, and we rely on the generosity of our partners, sponsors, and individuals donors. I ask you to humbly consider as you think about your donation plans for the coming year and the future, and you'd keep Whistler Institute in mind. Also, please sign up for our newsletter to learn more about our organisation, upcoming events and opportunities to become involved in our quest to advance opportunities for lifelong learning in Whistler. Lastly, and most importantly, thanks to all of you for coming out and supporting these community dialogues. Mandy and I and our board of directors look forward to seeing you at our final and April event. So thank you very much, and thank you so much, Kennedy, for being here.
Yeah.